was when I first began paying attention to my own days. Really paying attention. You see, that's when something remarkable happened. I discovered that activity alone wasn't doing the job. I was busy, yes, but I wasn't always advancing. And that's when it struck me. A day unexamined is almost always a day repeated. If I didn't pause long enough to look back, I was destined to run the same laps tomorrow. That's not progress. That's motion without meaning. I learned that reflection is what converts activity into achievement. Not the doing alone, but the looking back at what was done. It's the quiet moment when the dust settles and the truth shows up. The daily review became the lens that helped me see what the noise of the day tried to hide. I discovered strengths I wasn't using enough and weaknesses I was allowing to grow roots. And each discovery carried a message. Do more of this, less of that. Never repeat that again. The daily review is where experience becomes instruction. Every day hands you its own little classroom. Some days teach gently, some days teach with a brick, but the lessons are always there, waiting for someone disciplined enough to gather them. I realized that a mistake made twice is no longer a mistake. It's a decision. And the only way to stop deciding poorly is to confront the thing head on, with honesty, with courage, with pencil in hand, asking what the day was trying to say. I found that mistakes, once examined, become momentum. There's something powerful about catching yourself in the act, of seeing where you slipped, where you rushed, where you postponed what mattered. It stings a little, and that sting becomes energy. Suddenly you walk into tomorrow with a sharper edge, a clearer purpose, a better plan. The day will give you its value if you ask for it. It's shy about offering it freely. You have to pursue it. The review is that pursuit. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes longer when the day has been especially generous or especially challenging. But in those minutes, the mind begins to organize what the hours have scattered. And once organized, it becomes usable. You can build on it. You can grow from it. I've watched people drift through weeks, months, even years, repeating the same patterns because they never paused long enough to extract the lesson. They kept acting, but the acting never changed. And nothing changes until you change. The review is where that change begins. You hold the day in your hand like a small coin and ask what it's worth. You look at what you earned, what you wasted, what you ignored, and suddenly you see it. Tomorrow can be different because tonight you chose to understand today. That's the purpose of the daily review. Not to shame, not to scold, but to illuminate. To show you where the gold is buried in your own routine. To remind you that understanding precedes improvement. And to help you make sure that the next sunrise finds you a little wiser, a little sharper, a little more intentional than you were before. Accountability has a way of clearing the fog from a person's life. I've seen talented people drift because they never held themselves to their own intentions. And I've watched ordinary folks rise simply because they kept an honest mirror in front of them each day. Accountability is that mirror. It's the quiet conversation you have with yourself when no one else is around to applaud or criticize. It's the bridge between what you meant to do and what actually happened. When you measure yourself daily, something interesting occurs. Excuses begin to lose their charm. They don't sound as convincing when you speak them to yourself, especially at the end of the day. That little voice inside says, now hold on. Did you really give it your best? Did you really run out of time, or did you run out of intention? Accountability invites that voice to speak up, and growth begins the moment you stop arguing with it. I used to think effort alone would carry the day, but effort without honesty is just wishful activity. The review reveals truth. And the truth, even when it stings, is a gift. It shows you where you stand, where you slipped, where you shined. Some nights you look in that mirror and you feel proud. Other nights you feel exposed. But both are necessary if you want to move from dreaming about a better life to actually building one. When people avoid accountability, it's rarely because they lack discipline. More often, it's because they're afraid of what they'll see. They fear the gap between intention and result. But that gap doesn't shrink by being ignored. It only grows. And one day, it becomes regret. Better to face it daily when it's still small enough to fix with a shift in attitude or a fresh decision.
For those who want to study this lesson in a focused environment, there is a link to the deep dive version in the description. There you will find a deeper, distraction-free video and a written action guide built from the same ideas. You can also watch with your screen off if you prefer to listen.
Track habits, not hours. Habits are the gears that turn the rest of your life. A single strong habit can change the course of a year. A single weak habit can undermine the finest plan. When I looked at my own days, I saw patterns, some good, some not so good. The good ones were worth reinforcing. The bad ones were worth interrupting. But I wouldn't have known either unless I wrote them down and studied them. The mind forgets. The page remembers. And don't just track what you did. Track what moved you forward. Progress isn't the same as busyness. Busyness is easy. Anyone can fill a day with motion. But progress has a direction. It has intention behind it. The question worth asking is not how much did I do, but did I advance? Did I get closer to the person I'm trying to become? Did I honor the disciplines I promised myself? Those are the metrics that matter. Once I started measuring those things, I realized something important. The right metrics guide better behavior. They act like little signposts through the day. When you know you'll be writing something down tonight, you think a little differently at noon. You hesitate before drifting. You pause before postponing. You remind yourself that the day will eventually report back, and you'll have to review the evidence. That alone can turn a wandering afternoon into a productive one. It's easy to give yourself high marks when you're not measuring anything real. But when you decide that only progress counts, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. You start seeing patterns you never noticed before. You notice that certain small disciplines make the whole day easier. You notice that a few careless moments can undo hours of good effort. And that awareness becomes your internal compass, steering you back on course. I often told people that life responds to numbers when the numbers reflect reality. Not vanity numbers, not the kind that make you feel good, but teach you nothing. I'm talking about the numbers that reveal character. How many promises you kept. How many disciplines you practiced. How many times you rose above convenience and chose purpose instead. Track what matters, and suddenly the day becomes a teacher again. It gives you feedback. It nudges you. It challenges you. And if you listen closely enough, it begins shaping you into someone who no longer needs to guess whether progress is happening. You'll know because you've counted it, you've watched it, you've strengthened it, and tomorrow you'll build on it. Evening has a way of telling the truth. When the pace slows and the world quiets down, the mind finally has room to speak up. That's why I've always valued the evening inventory. It doesn't take long, but it carries enormous weight. It's the moment when the day shows its report card, and you decide what tomorrow ought to look like. Each night I would ask myself what I did well, not to brag, but to reinforce. The mind needs reminders of victory, just as much as warnings of error. When you notice the things you handled with excellence, you're more likely to repeat them. And repetition of the right behavior is one of life's greatest multipliers. A small success acknowledged becomes a larger one tomorrow. Then I would ask what I neglected, not as a punishment, but as a spotlight. Neglect hides if you let it. It blends into the busyness of the day and tells you that it doesn't matter. But the evening inventory brings it out into the open. It asks why the important was postponed, why the meaningful was delayed, why the necessary was ignored. And the answers you discover often reveal more about your habits than your intentions. Next came the question of learning. What did the day teach? Every day teaches something. Discipline, patience, humility, strategy, timing. Some lessons are pleasant, others come wrapped in frustration, but all are useful if you gather them before they fade. The mind forgets quickly, but reflection anchors the lesson so it doesn't drift away with the evening breeze. The beauty of this nightly practice is that it becomes routine. And once it becomes routine, it becomes powerful. Improvement starts the moment awareness becomes a habit. When you get used to checking in with yourself, the day begins to reshape itself around your intentions. You start noticing the small choices, the quiet impulses, the moments that usually slip by unnoticed. And awareness, once awakened, rarely goes back to sleep. There were nights when the inventory felt easy, days filled with productivity, kindness, discipline, progress. Those nights were enjoyable, but the nights that changed me most were the ones when I had to confront my own drift. The days when I let convenience take the lead. The days when my ambition stayed on the shelf. The days when excuses slipped in dressed as reasons. That's when the inventory became priceless. That's when growth stirred. It's remarkable how a simple question at the end of the day can start redirecting the next one. When I asked what I neglected, I found myself trying harder the following morning. When I asked what I learned, I started looking for lessons long before sunset. When I asked what I did well, I began building on strengths instead of waiting for weaknesses to disappear on their own. The evening inventory isn't a ceremony. It's not something you do for applause or approval. It's a private meeting of the mind, a conversation between who you were today and who you intend to be tomorrow. And if you treat it with honesty, it becomes one of the most reliable tools for personal transformation you'll ever use. A day examined is a day redeemed. A day reviewed is a day improved. And a day improved becomes the beginning of a better life, one evening inventory at a time. There comes a moment in every honest review when the spotlight lands on the gap, the space between what you planned and what you performed. It's not always a comfortable moment, but it is always a valuable one. The gap tells the truth with no decoration. It shows where discipline wavered, where commitment thinned, where intention was strong, but follow-through was weak. And if you're willing to study that space, it becomes one of your greatest teachers. I used to think that gaps were signs of failure, but I learned over time that they were simply indicators, markers, pointing to the exact place where improvement could begin. The gap doesn't say you're incapable. It says you're unfinished. It says there is room to tighten, strengthen, sharpen. And there's nothing wrong with that. Life is a long workshop if you choose to treat it that way. Most people try to hide their gaps. They cover them with excuses, distractions, busy schedules, anything that keeps them from looking too closely. But the daily review invites you to face that gap while it's still small. Today's gap is manageable. Today's gap can be redirected with a single decision. But a gap ignored becomes a canyon over time. And one day you look back and wonder how so much distance formed between who you meant to be and who you've become.
Motivation isn't the problem. Misplaced motivation is. Videos can fire you up, but without a plan, that energy fades. JimRohnFans.com provides action guides that show you exactly how to apply these philosophies in your own life. The longer you delay, the longer your life stays the same.
That's why the daily review matters so much. It doesn't ask you to rebuild your life every evening. It asks for awareness. And with awareness comes the power to correct your course in small but meaningful ways. I discovered that when I made miniature changes, getting up 10 minutes earlier, reading a few extra pages, cutting one indulgence, adding one discipline, my whole lifestyle began to reorganize itself around those decisions. People often overlook small corrections because they seem too insignificant. They think the change must be dramatic to be worthwhile. But dramatic changes rarely last. They exhaust you. They overwhelm you. But a small correction, you can sustain that. You can repeat it tomorrow and the day after. And pretty soon, you look back and realize you've moved farther than you ever expected. I've seen lives turn around with nothing more than a shift in tone, a calmer response, a single discipline, practiced consistently, 1 degree. That's all. Success is rarely about the huge leap. It's about the steady steps. The daily review gives you the opportunity to find the next step, the next adjustment, the next nudge that keeps you on track. There were times when I wanted to fix everything at once. I'd look at the list of things I neglected and feel tempted to rewrite my whole life overnight. But I learned that the mind doesn't respond well to overhaul. It rebels. It collapses under the weight of too much change. So I stopped asking myself to become a different person in a single night. Instead, I asked for one improvement, one shift, 1 degree. And that degree became the foundation for the next. The miracle of small corrections is that they build momentum. Once you experience the benefit of even a tiny improvement, you start looking for others. What else can I refine? What else can I strengthen? And before long, the person you were last month begins to fade, replaced by someone more disciplined, more focused, more prepared for opportunity. Small corrections have a way of restoring hope. When you realize you don't need to conquer the mountain tonight, that all you need is one step in the right direction, the burden lifts. Progress becomes possible again. And consistency becomes something you can actually achieve because it's built out of small, manageable pieces. So each evening, when you sit with your review, don't look for the grand overhaul. Look for the little angle you can adjust, the tiny shift that aligns you more closely with your goals. That's the secret to long-term success. Not force, but finesse. Not revolution, but refinement. 1 degree at a time. Reflection is a powerful tool, but it becomes even more powerful when you give it a place to live. Thoughts left floating in the mind tend to drift away, but thoughts written down, spoken aloud, captured in some form, they stay. They take shape. They become part of your philosophy instead of part of your forgetfulness. That's why I've always encouraged people to use tools of reflection. Simple tools, nothing fancy, just something that helps the mind translate experience into wisdom. A journal became one of my greatest companions. Not a diary of events, but a record of insights. I didn't write about every detail of the day. I wrote about what the day meant. A thought that arrived in the morning, a lesson disguised in an inconvenience, a moment when patience won or discipline lost. Writing clarifies confusion. You might walk around all day with a vague feeling that something needs adjusting, but once you put pen to paper, the feeling becomes a sentence. The sentence becomes an idea, and the idea becomes something you can act on. For those who don't enjoy writing, a checklist can work wonders. A simple list of the habits you want to maintain, the disciplines you want to build, the standards you want to keep. There's something powerful about marking a box at the end of the day. It's a small act, but it signals completion, commitment, continuity. And if a box goes unmarked, that's valuable too. It reveals an area asking for attention. The checklist becomes a scoreboard for your private disciplines. There were times when I preferred to speak my thoughts instead of writing them. I'd record a short message to myself, just talking through the day. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't planned. But hearing my own voice describe my own actions did something important. It made the truth undeniable. It's hard to hide from yourself when you hear the words out loud. A voice note can serve as a companion to your conscience, reminding you where you stood strong and where you drifted. The key is to externalize thought. Get it out of your head and into a form you can revisit. The mind is busy. It rearranges memories. It blurs the edges. But a written sentence or a recorded word stays exactly as it was. And when you return to it days or weeks later, you'll find patterns emerging, patterns of improvement, patterns of neglect, patterns of growth. These patterns will guide you better than any guesswork ever could. I've met many people who tried to rely on memory alone for their lessons. But memory is a poor secretary. It files what you didn't ask for and misplaces what you meant to keep. That's why reflection without record is soon forgotten. You end up learning the same lesson again and again because you never captured it the first time. But once you write it, speak it, track it, you own it. And ownership is the beginning of mastery. The tools don't matter as much as the habit. Use what fits your style. A notebook, a card, a single sheet of paper, a small recorder. What matters is the decision to preserve your insights so they don't evaporate with the evening air. Because those insights gathered consistently will someday form a philosophy strong enough to support your biggest ambitions.
For those who want to study this lesson in a focused environment, there is a link to the deep dive version in the description. There you will find a deeper, distraction-free video and a written action guide built from the same ideas. You can also watch with your screen off if you prefer to listen.
When a person decides to hold themselves accountable, the world begins to respond differently. People start to trust you, not because you made a grand announcement, not because you put your goals on display, but because your behavior begins to show consistency. Reliability has a way of announcing itself without a single word spoken. I learned that personal responsibility is the first qualification for leadership. Long before you lead others, you must demonstrate that you can lead yourself. If you can't keep a promise to yourself, how will you keep a promise to anyone else? If you can't depend on your own daily disciplines, why should someone else depend on you? Leadership isn't granted by title. It's earned in private. Each time you keep a commitment that no one else will ever see, something inside you grows. Call it self-respect. Call it inner strength. Call it integrity. It doesn't matter what you name it, but you'll feel it. You stand a little taller. You walk with a bit more certainty. You start to believe that if you say you'll do something, you'll do it. And once you believe that about yourself, others begin believing it too. I've watched people try to impress the world while neglecting their private conduct. Public enthusiasm with private inconsistency doesn't last long, but private accountability, quiet, steady, daily, builds a life that can handle opportunity when it arrives. When you hold yourself accountable, you produce a character that aligns with your ambitions. And when character and ambition match, doors begin to open. Responsibility has a reward that few talk about: peace of mind. It's difficult to sleep well when you know you've let yourself down. But when you end the day knowing you honored your own standards, even imperfectly, you rest easier. You don't have to hide from the mirror. You don't have to explain away your choices. You simply know you gave the day an honest effort. And that knowledge brings a quiet kind of confidence. There were seasons in my life when I wanted greater trust from others, trust in business, trust in friendship, trust in partnership. But trust isn't requested, it's earned. It shows up when people see you show up. And not just on the good days. Trust forms when others watch you follow through, even when it's inconvenient. And that type of trust is only possible when you practice accountability long before anyone is watching. The daily review plays a vital role in this. It keeps you conscious of your conduct. It reminds you that responsibility isn't just about what you expect from life. It's about what life can expect from you. When you ask yourself each evening whether you kept your promises, whether you honored your disciplines, whether you acted in alignment with your values, you're building a foundation that others can rely on. And here's something I've discovered. Self-respect grows in the same soil where personal responsibility is planted. When you keep private promises, you strengthen public character. When you take responsibility for your own direction, you become someone others naturally want to follow. Because people are always looking for reliability, and reliability begins at home. Responsibility may seem like a burden at first, but carried daily, it becomes a privilege. It becomes the mark of someone who has chosen to live deliberately rather than accidentally. And that choice, made again and again, becomes one of the richest rewards a person can earn. Insight is a wonderful thing, but it was never meant to sit on the shelf. I've met people who collected insights the way others collect souvenirs. They filled notebooks with ideas, observations, lessons, all beautifully written. Yet nothing in their life changed. They mistook understanding for achievement. But understanding without implementation is just entertainment for the mind. The purpose of reflection is action. The goal of the daily review isn't to admire what you discovered. It's to convert those discoveries into tomorrow's agenda. Once I realized that, my entire approach shifted. I stopped asking only what the day taught me and started asking what the lesson required of me. That question has power. It demands movement. It demands adjustment. It demands follow-through. Some evenings I'd see clearly what needed to change. Maybe it was a habit that needed strengthening, a conversation that needed to happen, a task that needed completion. And the temptation was to say, I'll get to it when I feel inspired. But inspiration is unreliable. Action is dependable. So I began writing my lessons directly into the next day's plan. If the review revealed a weakness, I designed a correction. If it revealed progress, I designed a continuation. The review shaped the schedule instead of the schedule shaping the review. Most people let days stack up without revision. They keep repeating the same patterns because nothing in the day prompts a different approach. But when you take your insights seriously enough to assign them actions, the day becomes a workshop rather than a treadmill. You move from drifting to directing, from observing to building. I found that when I took yesterday's insight and placed it directly into today's behavior.
The most common problem people have is that they get pumped up from motivational videos but have no clue where to put that energy. You can find action guides that will explain the steps you need to take to start moving in the right direction at jimrohnfans.com. These action plans are built on the principles and philosophies you find in these videos. If you keep waiting, then you'll just keep waiting. Start changing your life now.
Other nights, the lesson was deeper. Change your attitude, adjust your expectations, soften your tone, strengthen your resolve. Whatever the lesson was, it demanded expression. A lesson unexpressed becomes a lesson lost. But a lesson acted upon becomes part of your character. That's the beauty of turning insight into action. It transforms knowledge into lifestyle. It closes the gap between who you say you are and how you actually live. And once action becomes a natural extension of reflection, growth becomes continuous. You don't have to wait for a breakthrough. You become the breakthrough, one implemented lesson at a time. So don't let your insights gather dust. Don't let your discoveries remain untested. Use the daily review as a launch pad for the next day's behavior. Let each lesson travel from your mind into your habits, from your reflection into your routine. That's how you build a life that's not only thoughtful, but effective, not only aware, but advancing. There's a certain freedom that comes when you know you've examined your days instead of simply lived them. A reviewed life has a sharpness to it, a clarity, a sense of direction that doesn't drift with the winds of circumstance. I discovered that daily accountability keeps your philosophy tuned, your habits aligned, and your purpose awake. It removes the haze that so often settles over the unexamined life. I used to imagine what life would look like if someone important were watching every move I made, someone evaluating my consistency, my integrity, my discipline. And then it occurred to me one evening during a quiet review. Someone is watching. Someone important. Someone whose opinion carries more weight than any audience or critic. That someone is you. You know your own truth. You know when you rose to the occasion and when you backed away. And when you hold yourself accountable each day, you begin living in a way that earns your own respect. There's nothing quite as powerful as liking the person you're becoming. Not out of pride, but out of honesty. Out of the knowledge that today was lived with intention, not by accident. That the hours were shaped rather than scattered. That you didn't drift through the day, hoping things would go well. You crafted the day, corrected it, refined it, and then learned from it all over again. Living reviewed means you don't accumulate regret in the shadows of your days. Regret builds quietly when no one is paying attention. It gathers in the corners where discipline was ignored and potential was postponed. But daily accountability sweeps those corners clean. It keeps you aware. It keeps you awake to the small decisions that become the big outcomes. And with awareness comes the power to change direction before disappointment hardens into regret. Some people think accountability is a burden, a constant reminder of what's missing. But I found the opposite to be true. Accountability became a source of strength. It kept me honest, but it also kept me encouraged. Even on the days when the review revealed more failures than victories, the act of reviewing gave me hope. Because as long as I could see the truth, I knew I could change it. And that's the real reward of living reviewed. You stay in motion. You keep improving. You keep learning. You keep refining. And the person you are at the end of the year looks just a little wiser, a little steadier, a little more disciplined than the person you were at the beginning. Not because of some grand event, but because of daily accountability, quietly shaping your life day after day. So live reviewed, not regretful. Hold your days up to the light. Ask the honest questions. Celebrate what went well. Confront what didn't. Learn from everything. And let each evening guide the next morning. If you do that long enough, you'll find yourself living a life that feels intentional, purposeful, and deeply satisfying. A life shaped by your own thoughtful hands.